is entirely appropriate, and I would support carving out the filibuster on this. We should make it more difficult to shut the government down, Republicans or Democrats in the future. It's a core responsibility to keep it open.
That was Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman talking about potentially limiting the filibuster as a way to end this shutdown. By the way, we're going to be talking to him at the top of the 8 o'clock hour.
Yeah, he went on to say that his fellow Democrats should support the initiative since they were for it just a couple years ago, although they were talking in a more broader sense for issues like abortion rights, not necessarily just keeping the government open.
Correct.
Anyway, joining us to talk more about the fight to fund the government and much more is Princeton University's Dr. Lauren Wright. Lauren, good to see you as always. To Fetterman's point about this sort of narrow carving out of the filibuster for keeping the government open, do you see this option going anywhere?
You know, I do see Democrats exploring this quite often, but what ends up happening is they don't get what they want. As Fetterman mentioned just a couple years ago, they were calling the filibuster a Jim Crow relic. They said we need to get rid of this thing, but it is the primary way. And when Democrats are in the minority, they use it all the time that they can exercise their authority. And so no matter which party is proposing getting rid of it, they end up either regretting it, they probably will, or they'll shortly use it to get what they want. And so I don't really see anything happening with this. I don't think it'll go anywhere.
Yeah, so the filibuster is, you know, such a tradition in the Senate. A lot of people really hold on to it, Lauren. Historically, has the filibuster been important? Can you put that into context for people?
Well, I think the recent history is the most interesting. You know, from 2024 to 2025, Democrats have used it 4 times. And so it is something that the minority party continues to rely on to express the will of their own voters. And that's something that is very important to our country's tradition. You know, it's very interesting if you look back at the history from, you know, even 2019, 2020. Democrats, when we were talking about big police reform bills, things that would end no-knock warrants, things that would make police data available to the public, things that would make it a much more open institution, at least at the federal level. Democrats stopped that. Kamala Harris called it crumbs. She said this isn't enough, and they used the filibuster to do that. And so, you know, in addition to just the long history of the filibuster, and of course, it's been used for laws many people find abhorrent to prevent or enable. The recent history shows both parties, when they're in the minority, they really want that tool.
Let's talk about the other part of this conversation. Of course, we're talking about the filibuster because the government is shut down. What are your students noticing out there? You know, if this were, you know, March, I'd be saying, you know, spring break, they can't get their passports to head out of the country. We do know the holiday travel season is coming up, but are they feeling any impacts at all of the government shutdown when you talk to them?
Well, I can definitely speak to Princeton as a whole. You know, I'm writing a book right now about intellectual diversity on elite campuses. So I know offhand we have about 11% self-identifying conservatives on this campus, and the overwhelming majority of faculty and students are liberal, and they don't like Trump very much. That's very easy to say, and it's very apparent. I just went to an event last night on campus, for instance, where one of the speakers was talking about traveling down to DC to participate in No Kings. And so I do think this opinion is pretty widespread. But something I do try to teach in my presidency and executive power course, which I'll be teaching next fall, is we really don't have a king. And that applies to Trump too. We need to put this in the context of the way our government is set up. This is a president who is checked all the time, both by Congress, his own party in Congress checks him all the time and doesn't do what he wants, by the Supreme Court, which is 6-3 in his favor, but has checked him on everything from the 2020 election to the environment to immigration to maybe even possibly soon his tariffs that he holds near and dear. And so there are many ways the president does not get what he wants. And that's a reflection of the fact that we do not have a monarch. We have a representative democracy where presidents are constantly checked by the media, their own party, and the opposing party, and our institutions.
One could make the argument that the president's really been pushing back on that, all of those checks, right? He's been pushing them away. I would love for you to talk about the expansion of presidential power. Clearly, he's not a king, he's not a monarch, but he has been granted, in part by the Supreme Court, all sorts of expansive power that the presidency did not have before this.
Right, and that's how Supreme Court decisions work, right? The really tough issues get to that level. Presidents do get to appoint Supreme Court justices. That's part of their traditional power. And those court members lay down decisions that get implemented and are sort of the law of the land until another challenge is brought forth. That's what we should want in our society. And so I think what I do see too often is, and it happens to be on the Democratic side right now because they're out of power, they don't have the White House or Congress, is anything they don't like is monarchy. Everything they don't like is we're an authoritarian system. And we're absolutely not, because, you know, I really believe, and we saw this in the Biden administration during COVID, there are many examples of this, for instance, social media, censorship, you name it, where when the shoe is on the other foot and Democrats are in control, they're very happy to use executive power to stretch their authority as far as it can go.
All right, Dr. Lauren Wright, we
Lauren.
appreciate the time as always. Hopefully we will see you again next week.
Sounds good.